Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We are here again at the first ever LAC Summit. It's day 5 of our whole week of sharing and learning where schools and organizations are at in their journey towards building a data culture. And we have a really interesting talk today with Vincent Jansen. Before we jump in, I'm just going to take a moment to tell you all a little bit about this summit and why we're doing it. So my name is Emma Burns, and I am the Professional Learning Coordinator at Consilience Learning, which is the organization that is sponsoring this event and the organization that runs the Learning Analytics Collaborative. And in case you're not already aware, I just want to tell you a little bit about the LAC and what we do. If you've got any questions after this, please reach out because we'd be more than happy to organize a demo call for you. As you can see on the slide, the LAC is a service and a platform, and we help schools that want to use learning analytics to improve and transform. The way we do that is we help schools use data to make an impact. We start by collecting all the data that you have in a school, and that's not just your academic grades, it's also your demographics, your well-being data, all the data that you have. And then we collaborate with you to figure out the best way to present that data as information. Then we teach the users how to use that information. So we provide a lot of training and protocols and other tools so that your community can gain insight about your learners. That's really creating a culture of data use, and we believe that that has a really big impact on teaching and learning, on student outcomes, and on schools. So we have over 100 visualizations in our LAC platform, and each one of those has been customized to answer the questions that schools have. We've got dashboards for teachers who want to see different assessments for their class on the same screen. We've got dashboards for specialists, for example, learning support teachers who might want to see the impact of their interventions. We have dashboards for administrators and board level who need to see more high-level aggregate data. And we have dashboards for parents and students who want to look at an individual student's learning over time. We have over 50 schools in our collaborative from all over the world, and we're all about sharing the learning. So when one school asks us to develop a visualization for a new assessment or to answer a new question, or they develop a new protocol for a discussion, we share that information with other schools. So that way everyone can learn and grow. And one of the ways that we do that is with our webinar series and our virtual summit. And so I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker for our summit. This is Vincent Jansen. He is the CEO of Denra Consulting, which is a tech consulting group. Originally, Vincent was the Director of Academics and Technology in international schools. And now he helps other schools to work with their data systems. So I'm really excited to hand over to Vincent to hear about moving from a data audit towards a data trust ecosystem. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Emma. I'm pleased to be here, and so welcome to everybody who's joining this presentation or seeing it later at any point in time. Let me share my screen here so we get started. So I believe that you should be able to see it now. Just let me know if it's not showing up on your screen. So I'm happy to share some thoughts with you today regarding data audits and digital trust ecosystem. What I think is very important in schools when they started a technology program many years ago, potentially, and as the technology systems grow, I really feel it's important, having been in this field now for many years in independent and international schools, that utilizing the data really helps to optimize and extract the maximum value from your technology ecosystems. So I'm going to share some of those thoughts with you today. So here's a quick outline. And one of the key points here is the introduction of a new, let's just say, a framework called the Digital Trust Ecosystem Framework. Even though we start with, let's say, a data audit, we look at your integration with your school mission. The framework is presented and is authored by ISACA, which stands for International Systems Audit and Control Association. ISACA focuses on cybersecurity, data management, and governance. Although the framework covers data security and privacy, that's not the only components. It actually encompasses the entire technology ecosystem. It's used by organizations and schools worldwide, and it's something I wanted to introduce to everyone today. So we talk about what is a data audit, and I think the whole idea with the data audit, it unlocks the value of your data. So more and more schools are recognizing that the insights that data can support individualized learning and operational efficiency, and also show trends related to what your mission is, which is obviously student success. The key word here is also that it's digital information, and all these technology ecosystems you have on campuses or in your organization capture a lot of data. And often we don't only see some of the data come out in reporting, but when you begin to aggregate it into a specialized data store and then look at high-level analytics, it actually starts to tell a meaningful story. And it's all about the meaningful stories, especially if you're student learning. As Emma mentioned earlier, you can really focus on individualized or personalized learning. I think this is where the real strength of why schools begin with a data audit. In a secondary focus is data risk management. Yes, security and privacy, we all talk about that, really managing your data, but it really helps to identify the structure and of the data you have in your systems and extracting the maximum value while minimizing the risk through all the phases of the data lifecycle, which we're going to show a bit later. And I really want to focus on that it's a change management process. And I know that in most schools I've been involved with as well as a technology coordinator and a director of technology, and even as an academic director, that change is a biggest challenge in schools, how to shift from the ways that people are doing it now to even thinking about data as extracting value to support your students and as well as operations. So change management is probably the biggest challenge that faces schools, especially when you're shifting the whole organization. Often the data and the data audits are focused around the technology team, but I really want to emphasize throughout today's session that it's a whole school approach. All right, so I'm gonna come back to that in a minute. And again, it's a whole school approach, and it's about change management towards a data culture. So let's take a look at the data audit. Now, as I mentioned to you, it encompasses let's say these 7 components of the data audit. Security and privacy is part of it, but also the integrity of the data, the quality of the data, the resilience of the data. If there's any data loss, can you recover it, that sort of thing, all of those components. And this is something that highlights the underlying layer of why we conduct a data audit. We're looking at these components in your school system. But we're also going to raise awareness, right, of the value of the data as an asset. Obviously, teachers want to see information as you just began a school year for all the schools, okay, except maybe in the Oceania area, Australia, New Zealand, where they have a different cycle. But most schools start in late August or September for their new academic year. And every year, teachers want to learn more about their students. Okay, so is the data available for them to see and learn about their students so they can start their learning path and a continuation from the previous academic year, regardless if they were in the same school or not? We also want to say that the value of the data is a strength. It begins to shift the thinking that data is important. Okay, it is a value. We also want to look at a school-wide culture of data trust. Now, what I mean about data trust is not just saying, oh, is the numbers accurate? Is the data that's in the system accurate? Is it meaningful? I've done I've been on teams with numbers of audits. I've led audits where we speak to people in the school and they say, well, we don't really trust the data. We extract it into an Excel spreadsheet and then we work with it, et cetera, et cetera. And so this type of process, we want to reduce it so that the data in the system and in producing reports or using analytics on the data is highly trusted by the entire school community. One of the things we've tried to do is extract meaningful insights and align to your mission. I'm going to have a special diagram on that a bit later because I think that is very, very key. As we've seen schools grow their technology ecosystem, often they get away from what their core mission is. Obviously, student learning is the primary objective or the primary goal, part of the mission. But a lot of the technology growth, because it's available, they are added to the system and sometimes just not quite aligned. I was in a high-level meeting with a school board of trustees one time, and there was an empty chair in the room. And I asked the director, the chair of the board, to say, well, why is there a chair in the room? And I always remember his answer. His answer was, if what you present in the board of the meeting, in the board meeting, that doesn't impact a positive impact on the student, then I don't really want to hear it. And I think that's a good example to say that that's our focus. Our mission as schools is to help students succeed. All right. And now we have the tools. I believe we have the tools now to really help each student, every student succeed. And that reminds me, that says that empty chair in the room, let's focus on that student, even though he's not present. So any responses should always relate to that. So I never forget that. And again, we're building a culture of data risk management and the governance. I know that I think schools are challenged to have data audits and then really focus on shifting the culture towards the data mission. And so this is why even external consultants are come into play, or school collaborations, or whether it's LAC analytics or any other types of tools that help schools build this or move towards this culture is really a vital process. All right, so when schools grow, they start with, let's say, the student information system and then learning management system. So what this is simply saying that most schools will go through a process of developing their technology ecosystem. So here's just a simple map. Obviously, I've used this at a particular school. I've removed the name, obviously, for confidentiality. So this is typical. Every school has an SIS. They have an admissions component, academics, marketing, communications, some technology, back layers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So most schools will begin, or depending on where you're at, with a school mapping process, which takes the systems and identifies where the data stores would be, right? So that's the first step. What data stores do you have that you are managing on your institution or in your institution? The next thing is to identify the type of unique data that are in these potential stores versus core data like student name, age, grade, etc. All right. Do you also have external data coming into the system? Do you use external assessments, for example? And that might be the external data systems that you have that's stored somewhere else that you bring in to help student and focus on student learning, that sort of thing. What is the quality and condition of the data, and who manages each of these systems? This is all integral components of the data audit. All right. Now, there are many types of data, not just structured or unstructured or fragmented data. All of these pieces have to come together. This is really the data audits that we conduct, or that people conduct in schools, is really to take a deeper dive into what you have in your systems, and then looking at opportunities to extract and utilize that data in a meaningful way. All right, so this is where we're coming from. So most schools have probably something like this. The data audit then says, let's dive a little bit deeper. Now, what I also look at is the student learning journey. All right, so this is a diagram that I put together, and I'm still working on it, to be honest. I don't even like it completely myself, to be honest, but I said this is the beginning point of saying, if a child comes to your institution at pre-K, for example, and then goes through the entire years of graduation, how many actual touch points, engagements, Where's the data housed if they're part of a house team or if they're getting student support or learning assessments? You realize that there's actually a lot of data that is captured on a student learning journey in different systems throughout your institution, as well as external. As I said, some of these are external assessments, math assessments, chem assessments. Again, IB program, if you're part of International Baccalaureate School, all of this data rests somewhere else. It can be brought back into the school, but these are all pieces of data information on a particular student. And this is probably not even complete. What's important, though, is to utilize that for learning growth. For example, we've just started the new academic year. Do all the teachers in perhaps your institution have the information on a particular student to start continuation of their learning in specific subject areas? History, for example, math, science, literacy, that sort of thing. Is what are the previous assessments indicate and tell the story of the students so that the current teacher can continuation of that learning path. These are why these data touch points are important, can be utilized for future learning growth for each individual student. Since these data analytics tools exist now in real time, it is now possible to really support individualized or differentiated learning paths for every student, knowing that this data exists. And this is really, I think, the core fundamental value of data audits. It really starts to present this, shall we say, present this opportunity that you can extract meaningful insights. All right, so there are, depending on who you talk to, there are many phases of the data audits. All right, so you can go through many different phases. So here's a few that I think are key. So obviously you get a data team. Who's going to be involved in this process? The second thing is, once you begin to plan the data audit, communicate the objectives and to everyone. I really think communication is always a key across the school campus. Talk to the parents, talk to the students, say this is what we're doing and why we're doing it. In any change management process, as I mentioned earlier, communication is a key. And even if people may disagree and able to provide feedback, at least they're aware. It's that awareness and opportunity to bind together that helps create that data culture. Again, we talked about the mapping. We just had that a few slides ago. Look at the processes, how they're collected. I've seen schools saying, well, we don't really trust the data because, for this admission process, we're missing some data. And for this, we're missing some data. And I'm like, almost like, why is this allowed? If you're meant to collect the data, let's collect the data. And we all know that schools are not make up these processes mandatory. Obviously, for student reporting, yes, but for other areas that may be a little bit more relaxed. So, but I think we need to move forward with a stronger approach to data collection, ensuring high quality, accurate data for all the data sets that we have, including security and access protocols, which is key. Again, establish a clear direction, a dictionary, business rules, best practices, who's going to be doing it, identifying the key personnel, get their input, etc. And as you go through towards the end here, where's the data going to be stored? Do we need to transform it and then communicate the results? So this, there's fluidity in how you approach data audits, but let's really clarify that the goal is to get meaningful insights to obviously your core mission, student learning, but it also can be operational as well. There's a lot more tools out there that can really support it. I'm not going to spend very long on this particular slide, but over the years, I've been in education now for quite a long time, and really worked in this area of data information systems. And I found that over the years, schools start with the data gathering, let's say stage 1. And then as they move forward towards what we are all currently experiencing, the addition of artificial intelligence in stage 6, well, this is part of it is a concern for me. Although I embrace it, I always think that we got to have a really good, solid data ecosystem first before we add machine learning tools to help produce those visualizations, which is why still in most cases it's done, human powered, shall we say. But most schools will have a data custodian to begin with, and as their ecosystem grows, they add a director of technology, then committees, and then you start focusing on institutional research with a data analyst, and then underneath that, you might look at augmenting those services. And I think a lot of schools now are at the stage where they really want to value the data and become data informed, all right, the stage 5, if you like, and therefore they need help or assistance to move that forward to really extract that meaningful data, okay? So most schools will go through this progressions, and most schools are probably at stage 4 or 5, or even starting at 6 at this stage. And that's why the data audit is important, because you're now focusing away from systems and really looking at what is stored in those systems that we can extract more value. And I think that that's a key piece. So now I'm going to move a little bit forward from the data audit and why that leads into what digital trust is. All right. So digital trust is the confidence in the integrity in the relationships, interactions, and transactions in an educational digital system. It's not just about the data, although it's a core component. It's about the entire ecosystem structure, the people, the processes, the organization, and the technology. All right, it's that whole thing together. And what we've done in the past is traditional management view of data systems, okay, all the technology in the school is usually people, process, technology. And I, as a consultant for quite a long time now, a number of years, I've always utilized something like this, whether it's a Comet model or the RACI model or other types of models you may have to assess your technology growth and how you're utilizing it in your schools. We often use this sort of triad, right? So we looked at the processes, we looked at people, the technology. Over the last number of years, my reports have been, or my recommendations that says, well, we need to add more organizational. There may not have been a central body overseeing the technology as it relates to the mission. So I said there needs to be a slight shift of things moving forward. So this is how the digital trust ecosystem framework came about. All right. So we look at saying that the organization itself has a clear and direct impact with the people, the processes, and the technology, the other 3 nodes. So we have the 4 nodes, and we have the 6 domains inside of that. And each of these are critical components to the structure. Now, as I mentioned to Emma earlier, that I was a chemistry teacher. So if you look at the different structures of something like this to this, if these domains, the culture, the links between the nodes are covalent bonds, this is actually a diamond structure. And you think of diamond being a hard element, of course, and of course, expensive and rich element in the world. Well, if all these pieces are integrated, then you've got to have a strong component to manage your ecosystem. If one of these, shall we say, bonds or domains, the word we were using, breaks, it is a completely different structure. All right, think about it from diamond to graphite. I mean, it's slippery, slides, whatever. And essentially that analogy really works utilizing this particular framework. So I'm not going to go through each one in detail. There are many layers within this framework. But over the last 2 years since this has come out, I've been utilizing this in my work with schools to say, can we use this? Could you consider utilizing this framework to help think about what each innovation initiative in your school would impact other areas? And they start to look at how this develops a whole school culture. Because the key here is that all of these components work together. They're all interconnected, all right? There are many layers in this framework, and it goes beyond the scope of this particular presentation. But all of this gives you an idea here that the 4 nodes are interconnected. The organization makes policies on the people. The people have to follow the policies laid out with the organization. This creates the culture, right? as the people work, there are certain processes they do. If something changes, then you got to shift that process. Or how do they add this new process with a new tool? Or so, yeah, that's the way we've done it before, so we're just going to do it the same way. Well, then you're not maybe potentially extracting the value of your technology or the processes themselves. So you're looking at optimization of the current systems and processes within what you have, etc. Everybody in the community can be involved, and you start to say that if you are introducing a new innovation or initiative in your school utilizing a technology tool, then consider every entity or every constituent within your community, including parents. A lot of schools, not saying they don't disregard the parents, absolutely not, because they're your client base, let's say, but they often don't get the potential value of their feedback in many cases. And I've seen that, and I've asked schools saying, reach out to your parents first, because I bet you if you engage them in the process, they'll be your biggest supporters. And I really think that's a strong point as I work with schools. Anyway, there are many others. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of some of the components of this framework. And there are said many, many layers. So what are some of the main points of this system is that it's a whole school view of the ecosystem. All right. It's not a technology view. It is a business model. So in most institutions that I'm now working with, technology is underneath the business area, the CFO, let's say, of the organization. Why? Because it's cost heavy. Other than human resources, technology is the most cost impact to a school, and it's growing. So the CFO, if you're a finance person, is going to say, well, what is so this is a business model. Not that schools are essentially businesses. Some would argue that one. I agree with that. I understand that. But it is a business approach and not a specific technology one, which then says this is a whole school model, including leadership and everybody involved. It applies systems thinking, so change in one impacts the other areas. Again, it's not about security or digital, it's about digital trust. It's trusting that every process is related and brings, and it will lead to value, okay, of why we're doing it. And the framework is not prescriptive. You can use it as a reference model. You can use it as directory. You can develop what we call resource allocation tables underneath it, develop outcomes and KPIs. You can develop many layers, or you can just say, hey, let's think about how this might impact the culture. Or if this technology tool is being added, how are we going to support it in the help desk? Okay, or how are we going to governance it? You know, direct and monitor. How are we going to add the governance? So we just use that as a value. So it's not, doesn't tell you how to do it. It just says, gives you a guide to use as a reference. And it looks at the 4 nodes and 6 domains. So governance is a key theme. As I mentioned, this is the focus of SACA to begin with. So returning to this, before I sort of summarize a few screens here, is that I wanted to really saying that aligning IT and data to your mission. So we talked about a business framework. This the digital trust ecosystem framework is a business model, not just strategy. So every school has a strategic document about their school and their mission for the 3 to 5 year document. Every school has that. All right. Can the IT team or the leadership team drill that down to an IT strategy and a governance model? And if you like, go further to a data strategy and a data strategy governance model. And these need to be aligned. Okay. And I think more and more schools are seeing that diagram, something like this will lead to the transformation of their schools towards a real data culture. All right. And this is where I think schools are heading as you move forward. So it's simply to say that look at your school strategic mission, take the strategic mission and says, how do I utilize my technology tools support that strategy? And then how can I extract the data that supports it all the way back up to that mission? And I think this is the circle to really extract and make an impact from your technology ecosystem. I'm going to say a few words about governance and talk about the data lifecycle from data creation to data destruction, because often we leave data in systems. You know, we've all seen it. And I've been talking again, I mentioned to Emma earlier about There are a lot of vendors now charging more and more prices to retain the same level of service for their school software, for the software supporting in the schools. And this is causing a little bit of a, I don't know, disturbance or ruffling the feathers about schools and saying, how can we support that? You know, we're fixed budget cycles, etc. So they're looking for opportunities to change system perhaps in order to support their meet their needs. So from data creation to data destruction, and when sort of continue on the data destruction, so when we lose a vendor, we have to get rid of all the data. Okay, and even in our own systems that you use all the time, if it's 2 years old and you don't need that anymore, do you archive it, and how do you archive it securely, that sort of thing. So these are just some points that in every stage of the data life cycle, there are 2 or 3, 4 bullet points of how to manage it, of what the process that the technology team probably in the school will need to approach, and then saying, how do we govern that? What does the governance team look like? How are they managing it? What metrics do you have in place to say that we are doing what we're supposed to be doing? I think this really starts to say what the challenge is to schools moving from a data audit to a data management and governance profile, because they don't have the manpower perhaps, right? And that's why sometimes an external consultant or support team to support them in this direction, moving me in this direction, is a key part of their process. Because it starts to add, I mean, all of us have dealt over the last few years cybersecurity, right? Cybersecurity is probably the #1 approach in schools, but things are now shifting towards utilizing the data in obviously within that framework of being secure and private, ensuring confidentiality, but also extracting meaningful insights to support who they are. Just to go back to the digital trust ecosystem, that lens between processes is really, really important about how the schools utilize the technology. And that governance lens, which is direct and monitor, okay, is really the key process here that says, once you've got all these systems in place, governance is also a very key step. I'll just skip this one and just move to the last slide here, is really just to say that once you move, Emma pointed out at the beginning, so I won't spend just more than a minute on this, is like, this is the data audit. The data audits will lead to a digital trust, and then finally the data insights. To have something in real time, actionable insights into learning and operation will maximize the value of your technology ecosystem and really optimize the use of the data and all the systems that they're growing. And I think schools are really moving in this. They're trying to shift the culture toward this. They're shifting the thinking toward this, but it's really where things are going right now. I thank you for your time. I know that we took a high level view of data audits and move it to digital trust. So data audits and digital trust, if you like, data trust ecosystem. I presented a framework that you could potentially use to help the management and governance of your systems containing the data. And finally, look at the ultimate objective for real-time data insights. And I hope this you found something of value on this presentation, and certainly look forward to answering any questions and hearing from you in the future if this is of interest. So again, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for taking the time, Vincent. If you're on the call and you have any questions, feel free to unmute and ask them, or just type them in the chat. But this was fascinating to me, especially coming at the end of our summit, because as you were showing all those the nodes, I was reflecting on, we've had 27 different conversations in the last 5 days, and each of them I was thinking, where does that go? They all went in a different place on that framework, and I thought, oh, this is what I was saying to you before we started, about every talk was so different, but there was like a common thread between them. And I think you've really mapped that common thread so well. So it's really interesting to me to see that.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, sorry.
I appreciate that. It's just, oh, sorry. Thank you, Emily. Thank you for this. So question?
So Emily says, do you have any suggestions or approaches for shifting stakeholders' mental model from conceptualizing data from a data product or data solution approach to a digital trust ecosystem approach? What challenges are common, and do you have suggestions to anticipate them?
Yeah, it's a great question, Emily. And I think that's the challenge. It's that change management process. If there was a sure proven way, I wish I knew what it was. Every school is different. Every school is open to a different approach. I know that I can think of just 2 or 3 examples where some schools, had a data support team where there's 4 or 5, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people supporting it, but they didn't communicate out to the entire school. Hi, nice to see you, Em. It didn't support back to the entire school, and therefore shifting the culture to everyone supporting the data is hard. You gotta involve the whole school and say, this is what our goals are. We want to have data on every student in a usable format, accessible to the teachers so that they can move it forward. So I don't know. I honestly don't really have an answer to saying how would you do it and what are the common frameworks. The common is to shift people's thinking, right? That change management process. I start by speaking with people. All right. Let's say you're in, I don't know what's your role, if I may ask, Emily, in your school?
I actually work in a company that outsources and supports data in school. So I'm a data analyst, data scientist.
Awesome. Awesome. Great.
The Data Nerd Show. I love it.
So I would say that you obviously through surveys, get the culture of the school now, and then work with the pieces that's identified as that could be strengthened towards accepting a new data product, data solution approach, and then I would utilize a digital trust ecosystem approach. For the last 2 years since I've seen it, I happen to know ISACA. I worked with a guy there that does a lot of work with ISACA. When he introduced it to me, I shifted everything and just use that as a framework. I've done summits with it. I've worked with schools, and all my recommendations and reports, this is where you should start from. You don't have to use anything. You just have to look at it. And as Emma said, I can see where each piece fits. That to me is already a huge step. But every corporation is the same, right? They're going to have emerging structures. They're going to have an architecture. They look at that as well. ISACA mostly supports corporate entities, small and large. And they also work with schools. And I'm one of the ones that are really working with schools about that. The challenge is to get people engaged and on board to saying that they feel part ownership in supporting that data culture. And a lot of it is communication, right? So if you know that you're a teacher and said, I know I have to do my grades. Everybody does their grade books and reporting, but there's more to it than that, right? And saying, well, would you be willing to put in your students' assessments for MAT assessments, for example, or some other assessments in the data? So then you have that, and oh yeah, if I can see what that is, that would help me, that sort of culture. It's communicating it. One of the things I worked with a school, I said, I had felt there was 1 or 2 people that had this initiative, but all the rest were just not engaged fully and said, I'm not so sure where you're going. So I asked them to present the whole idea, the plan and the model, and just invite feedback and invite parents and clearly identify what they would receive from it. And your parents are a huge advocate group. You get some strong parents who might be a board member, says, man, I saw this presentation by Emily, and this is where we think we're going to going. Boom, comes from the board, goes to the school head, and everybody's going to be doing it. So change management, how do you want to approach it in schools? It's the key piece.
Can I say too,
Thanks, that's helpful.
This came up as well in one of our earlier talks today. Matt Lennon from Issue School, he was talking about this idea of trust being such a key component in their building a data culture at their school. And he was saying they spent a lot of time establishing data norms with their teachers, and then they make a real point of upholding those norms all the time. And and having that trust in there so that they've earned that trust and respect from their teachers, so then they get the buy-in, and that builds it. And yeah, it's I know it's not the same thing we're talking about, but I see a lot of connection there.
But exactly right. It's getting their buy-in and that they have ownership of it. You know, in the old laptop programs that schools have started, I started early laptop programs. Gosh, I don't even know, what, 20 some years ago now, potentially, you know, laptop programs. And I was at a particular school and they had PCs, right? Windows machines. And the school issued them. And the parents came to me because I came in on as a new technology director. And they said it was a well-to-do school. And they said that all the parents had Mac machines at home. And so the kids didn't like the PC machines. All right. So I said, well, we have to renew a new lease. What would you like to do? So the parents said, we would like to pay for buying Macs completely, right up, almost up front, every parent. And so then we, you know, like you say, we got them all on board, and the school shifted to what the parents wanted. And in 2 years, the entire school of 800 were completely Mac based.
Wow.
Parents paid for everything. They wanted it that much. And I was like, wow, you know, like they bought out the leases. I actually sold the leases to other schools, but you know, it's that whole shift. It said you get one buy-in, they have ownership, they have a stake in it. That it helps to shift the thinking. And I mean, everyone. I mean, I worked at a school just a few years ago, not far from where I actually live. And we actually had, you know, the facilities team. They're not teachers. They're the grounds people. They do all this stuff. We gave them laptops, iPads to do some of the technology stuff. And because I found that they were doing a lot of sessions that weren't recognized, like in terms of supporting teaching and learning facilities. And then we put them all into a database that they were doing over 1,000 jobs a week. 1,000 transactions a week. Now think about the data there. And they kept saying, we're too busy, we're too busy, too busy. And of course, the school administration goes, well, you know, we just have to do this and this. 1,000 a week when they're putting it in real time. And then start to change the shift of thinking. Anyway, I go on and on, obviously, stories. I'm sorry, I'm full of stories, okay? I've been here a long time. Anyway.
That was so great. Thank you so much, Vincent. I'm going to stop recording.